Welcome to my Terrace of Endless Spring raid series. These videos will give you detailed insight into the ToES 10-man heroic encounters. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Protectors of the Endless fight for the Elite Loot version, providing a breakdown of mechanics and strategies to get the encounter done. The Protectors is the first encounter in the Terrace of Endless Springs. The encounter is a council-style fight where you'll kill off one of the three bosses one by one. What makes this encounter unique is that you'll gain access to higher item level loot if you do the bosses in a particular order. The caveat being that the encounter becomes significantly harder in terms of DPS and heal checks. For this fight, I would recommend that you go with 2 tanks, 3 healers and 5 DPS during progression. Once you get to reclears and pushing quick kill times, you can opt down to 1 tank and 2 healers. The encounter itself consists of 3 phases, where each phase will end once you kill one of the bosses. The bosses have separate HP pools, and once any boss dies, the remaining will return to full HP. The 3 bosses in question are Asani, Regale, and Cowlin. In order to get the elite heroic loot, you need to kill Cowlin last, but you can freely choose if you want to kill Asani or Regale first. For this guide, I'll recommend that you kill Regale first and Cowlin last, since it's the easiest way of getting your elite loot. The phase mechanics of this fight might seem a bit overwhelming at first, but it's very simple once you see it play out. Before we go into the phase specific mechanics, let's talk about 2 general mechanics of this encounter, being the Minions of Fear and the Shock Corruption. The Shock Corruption is simply a passive ability which heals the remaining protectors to full HP once any other protector dies. It also gives a stacking 25% damage increase to the remaining protectors, so everything will be hitting harder by the end of the encounter. In contrast, the Minions of Fear are far from a passive mechanic. These adds will spawn at an approximate 15-second interval throughout the entire fight and have approximately 1 million HP. They run in from the west side of the arena and fixate on the boss with the lowest HP. If these minions reach the boss, they apply a stacking buff to the boss, stacking up to 5 times. Each application grants 10% increased damage, and if it ever reaches 5 stacks, the boss essentially wipes your raid. To avoid this, you'll be slowing them, where hunter traps are really good, and killing them before they reach the boss. The interesting part of this mechanic is related to what happens when they die. When any of these Minions of Fear die, they grant the 2 closest players a similar stacking buff. For each stack of this buff, the player will deal 10% increased damage for 2 minutes, but if it reaches 10 stacks, once again, you'll wipe the raid. This general mechanic will be the backbone of how we get through the encounter in a smooth way, and there can be a lot of optimization put into this in different strategies. I'm gonna give you some different ideas of how you can do this, but I would recommend that you try it out and see what works for your specific composition. But more on that during the strategy section of this breakdown. With the general mechanics out of the way, which mechanics will we see in phase 1? Cowlin brings a debuff called Touch of Shah. This debuff is cast every 30 seconds and will place a dot on a random player, which lasts until the boss dies. When farming elite loot, this will be on your entire raid by minute 5, so it's going to tick very heavily towards the end and requires a lot of mana from healers to keep the raid stable. Regale uses Lightning Bolt and Lightning Prison. Lightning Bolt is just a small chunk of damage that goes out to a random player, and you can simply heal through this mechanic if you don't have extra kickers on your team, but it should be of little concern to you while progressing. Lightning Prison is very similar to several other mechanics that we've already seen. 2 players get a debuff, and after a few seconds they get stunned and deal AoE damage to allies within 7 yards. Simply move out of the group and get dispels from your healers. The tricky part to this mechanic is that you'll want to assign 2 specific healers to dispel this mechanic, since it overlaps with one of Asani's abilities, but it can also be placed on the healers, so make sure to have a backup in place. Finally, Asani casts Cleansing Waters and Water Bolt. Water Bolt is an interruptible cast which does heavy splash damage to a player and any players within 3 yards. This requires 3 players to form an interrupt chain and preferably to have 1 backup to avoid it going off. The final mechanic of phase 1 is called Cleansing Waters, and this is cast at the same time as Regale's Lightning Prison. When cast, it spawns a puddle of water under one of the protectors, and any target standing in this will receive a 30-second buff which heals them for 5% of their max HP and increases their healing taken by 50. As you can probably guess, this is not good to have on the bosses, but it's really great for your raid. so make sure to step in a puddle and purge the boss of theirs. Since this is a single target fight, you can simply purge Regale during this phase, as you do not care if Colin and Asani regain HP yet. Moving on to phase 2, the minions of Fear will continue to trickle through, and you'll keep juggling the stacks on your raid. We'll also see the introduction of 2 new abilities for phase 2, being Defiled Ground and Corrupted Waters. Defiled Ground is a tank buster mechanic which leaves puddles on the ground. Each hit will apply a stacking debuff to the player, increasing damage taken by subsequent Defiled Grounds for around 80 seconds. If you want, you can tank swap after a few stacks to keep it more manageable, but it's entirely possible to use the same tank and Cowlin throughout all of phase 2. You'll want to place the puddles tightly stacked and as close to the middle of the room as possible to keep free space on the edges of the room for phase 3. The second ability, Corrupted Waters, spawns a low HP water globule in the middle of the room, which will increase the haste of the bosses, so you'll want to prioritize this and kill it ASAP. If you kick Asani while this is up, you'll lock him out of spellcasting for a few seconds, which should allow you to return to your established kicking rotation. You want to make sure that your entire raid is stacked inside the middle circle when the globule dies, since it gives a 25% haste buff for 20 seconds to all your allies within. Apart from these new mechanics, all of Cowlin and Asani's abilities will remain from P1, while Regale's abilities disappear. If you're still progressing this fight, you can try to time the transition to phase 3 until right after Asani casts Corrupted Waters, such that you're gonna get the haste buff when starting off P3, but you should definitely not try to force this if it doesn't come natural. Once Asani dies, only Cowlin remains, and he'll use a grand total of 3 abilities while the minions of Fear are continuing their approach. He retains his passive dot ability and Defiled Ground, while he gains a new ability called Expel Corruption. This ability is cast every 40 seconds, and when cast, it drops a big ground effect under the boss, which lasts permanently. While you're inside this ground effect, you take heavy ticking damage, with damage decreasing the further away you are from the center of this circle. Everyone, except for the main tank, should be able to avoid this damage completely with proper positioning. The challenge to handling this mechanic is going to be covered in the upcoming strategy section. In this portion of the guide, we'll take a look at some strategic aspects of getting this fight done. A lot of people seem to disregard this boss and skip to Sulong or Lei Shi instead to get some easier kills done, but I would strongly advise that you practice the phases of this boss, since gear is not going to save you and you'll need to have the mechanical execution down sooner or later. Let's dive into it. The first strategic aspect that needs to be covered is related to the layout of the room and the positioning of your group relative to the abilities that come out. Long story short, I would suggest that you stack in the middle of the room for phases 1 and 2, where you'll be able to realize several benefits. You can benefit from increased uptime on the boss by limiting movement. You get benefits from AoE healing such as Healing Rain and Efflorescence. You get benefits from increased healing in phase 1 and haste in phase 2, and the list from benefits is quite long actually. But perhaps my simplest reason to why you should stack in the middle is that it makes the soaking of the minions really easy. We've already established that the minions grant a buff to the closest 2 players once they die, no matter how close they are. This simply indicates that we need to have the 2 soakers closer to the minion than the rest of the raid. And this is going to allow for us to keep the raid and the soakers on opposite sides of the boss, so we can minimize our movement to increase our uptime and thus efficiency on the boss. There are plenty of other ways to do this, but keeping it simple is going to eliminate a lot of stress for new groups getting into this mechanic. My second strategic tip is that once cleansing water is used, you find the puddle, you step into it, and reap the healing benefits to save the healers some mana for P3. For comparison, efficient groups can reach P3 with all healers having 100% mana left, and that should serve as a benchmark if you still struggle at P3. The next important strategic aspect is to get a good soaking order that works for your specific composition. I'm going to give 2 different ideas of what can be done, and I would recommend that you try it out to see what works for you and tailor it towards your specific comp. A pretty standard soaking rotation will be to assign 4 groups of 2 players that's going to handle the soaking. These 4 groups will alternate between taking 3 stacks and 2 stacks, where the first 2 groups start at 3 and the second 2 groups start at 2. If the fight's not over by your 4th rotation, you'll simply put in a 5th group, being your tanks, to take the rest of the stacks. A viable alternative to this, which is proven to get a lot lower kill times, is to assign 2 specific players with quick bursty DPS to get 5 to 6 stacks early on, and then letting them handle all the adds going forward by themselves. Preferable classes to this task could be hunters and mages, which can easily swap targets and benefit heavily from damage amping containing the adds. After the ad managing players get to 5 to 6 stacks, you start cycling in other DPS players to also get their stacks up, making sure to not drop the stacks on the initial 2. This allows for better damage amp funneling and optimization of your resources, but it also requires better group coordination. My last tip for phase 1 is to simply keep one of your interrupt heavy tanks on Regale and keep them out of the kick and rotation on Asani. This is going to allow for a lot less damage taken by having constant kicks for Regale, using something like a prop paladin with occasional Avenger Shield interrupts. Moving on to phase 2, the recipe becomes the same. Stack up, juggle the stacks, but now the Cowlin tank will move out of the group for Defiled Ground casts. You should place them in a nice semicircle towards the entrance and go back to hit Asani while the ability is on cooldown. This is going to require some good awareness by your tank, but since not a lot else is going on, it should be quite simple. This is going to allow you to funnel a lot of Vengeance Fuel damage onto Asani to shorten the phase further. Apart from this, the only addition will be the Water Globule, and I strongly recommend that you roll backup kickers early to ensure that you get a quick kick once it spawns, since you'll be channeling all your DPS onto the globe. Moving on to phase 3, there are really only 2 ways of doing this from my personal experience. The first thing you should know is that the first Expel Corruption comes very short after Asani dies, so make sure to rocket boost out to the designated position right before Asani dies to place the first corruption in a good spot. Make sure that you're moving away from the boss while he's casting Expel Corruption to minimize the damage taken. Between each of the corruption casts, he's going to use Defiled Ground twice, and swapping tanks to drop the stacks here is very helpful. The easy way of doing this is to simply drop the corruption in a semicircle around the edge of the room, and then finally using the middle of the room to finish the kill if needed. Healers and DPS should pre-move before the cast to get into a good stacked healing rain friendly position before the cast of Expel Corruption goes out, so we don't risk our HP during the transitions between the positions. The second way, and probably more efficient way of doing it, is that the tank holding Cowlin runs into the previous corruption with Cowlin before the cast, so that you can essentially stack the corruptions on top of each other. This is going to save a lot of room, but requires that you're vigilant with your HP. You will take a lot of damage doing this, so only really do it if you're comfortable and maybe have some defenses to save the day. While this is happening, your relative positioning for the adds will no longer be possible to maintain. So what you'll do is that you'll simply swap the relative positioning around, keeping the main raid in between the boss and the soakers. I'd strongly suggest that you let your healers or someone who has low stacks take these stacks, so your DPS can funnel as much DPS onto the boss as possible. There are some different suggestions regarding when you should lust, but I would recommend that any progressing group use Bloodlust to let the healer stabilize when it's needed. And that's gonna wrap it up for this guide. I truly appreciate the support that I've gotten since the launch of MOP, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well as any suggestions on future content in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future content. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.